mood management, which is the third of the 4 competencies that I want to talk with you about today. And mood management is about energy exchange. Your performance is really tied to your energy. We all know that. Under what conditions do you give your best effort? So let me see a show of hands. How many of you are morning people? Like me, you're a morning person. Can I see your hands, please? A lot of teachers are morning people. Yeah? Okay. And how many of you are night people? You really, I mean, this is hard for you. You're barely, yeah. I can tell because the morning people have been real. I can see your movement and what you're doing, you know, here on my screen. So I can tell the night people have kind of been, they're with me, but you're not quite awake yet, right? The night people don't really get going till about 2 in the afternoon. I mean, that's when you really start feeling your best, right? You're in your zone from 2 onward, unless you're really an extreme night person, in which case you don't even start till 4 or 5 o'clock. But the morning people, like me, I'm up at 4:30 every day. You know, and I'm up, I jump out of bed, I'm ready to go, but by 4 o'clock, I'm really tired. And I'm in that trough. Most of us fall into the energy trough after about 6 to 7 hours. We all have limits. We all have limits. But these limits can be extended. They can be extended. How many of you would like to have 2 more hours in the day when you really are at your best? 2 more, just 2 more hours. Yeah. Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? You can. You can. There are things you can do. And this is what elite performers get religious about. Because if you have to perform at an outstanding, world-class level, I don't care what the domain is, whether you're a business person, you're a scientist, if you have to have really good powers of concentration and you have to hit it just right, perfectly, day after day after day, you have to get religious about managing your managing your energy. Because you just can't afford to not be really controlling that very well. So it's really interesting to read some sports psychology material or coaches who work with this, really focus with people, whether they're executive coaches helping people who are operating, you know, they're heads of states, they're president. Don't you wonder? I mean, some days when I'm feeling really pressed by work, I think, get a grip, girl. You're not running a multinational company. You know, you're just head of department. Hello. I'm not Barack Obama. I don't have a country to run. I'm not running a war. I'm not in Afghanistan trying to run the war. My workload is actually, my level of anxiety, honestly, is, you know, not that high compared to some really top kinds of performers who have a much heavier load. But what they do can inform the rest of us. There's things that we can incorporate. We don't have to wait till kids are at elite levels of performance as adults to teach them some of that. So we know that mood directly impacts our attention and our ability to control our minds. It shapes our thoughts and our focuses. And I want to share with you some very simple, basic brain chemistry so you understand why I'm proposing the strategies that I'm going to propose, okay? So this is oversimplified, but it's still useful. So it's helpful to know that in your brain, you have 4 chemicals, basically, 4 groups of chemicals that help control your energy and your mood. And they're serotonin, GABA, the catecholamines, and your endorphins. I want to touch on each of these briefly, and then I'm going to emphasize, we're going to focus on serotonin, because that's your primary defense against depression and anxiety. And you hear a lot about serotonin in the news. So serotonin is a neurotransmitter that regulates your anxiety and your levels of depression. So people who are depressed have significantly lower levels of serotonin. This is why many of the popular antidepressants are SSRIs, which stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They inhibit the loss of serotonin, so they keep the serotonin levels higher. GABA is your body's natural relaxer. Your body's natural relaxer. Catecholamines are also neurotransmitters, but they're like your cavalry. They're the can-do. That's like norepinephrine, dopamine, and epinephrine. So those are the ones that, when the tsunami hit a few years ago, and you heard stories about people being swept out to sea, and they survived for 8 days, and you're thinking, how did somebody survive out to sea? The catecholamines are responsible for that. They are the ones that flood your brain in an emergency, and they enable you to endure and persevere through stuff that you would never be able to do otherwise. The endorphins are your body's natural narcotics. They're your pain relievers, okay? So I want to focus on serotonin because there are things you can do to manage your serotonin level. So I've already said it's your primary defense, and you can boost your serotonin levels. You can boost them, and you can keep them stabilized. What happens to a lot of kids, and a lot of adults for that matter, is that we don't pay attention to our mood systematically, and we just kind of allow ourselves to fluctuate throughout the day, which is fine for most of us, unless you want to really improve your performance. If you want to get better at what you're doing, then you need to manage your energy level so that you can be at your best more often. Serotonin is made from the amino acid tryptophan. Your body, this is your old biology lesson. I used to teach biology. You have 26 amino acids. They're the building blocks of proteins. Tryptophan is what your body uses to make serotonin. It converts tryptophan into something called 5-hydroxytryptophan, which is then converted to serotonin almost immediately. There's not much of a delay. And it's stimulated by light. So those of us who, like I came from a northern climate, and one of the challenges in a northern climate is you have these periods of months at a time when you have much less sunlight. You know, and I came from Montana in the U.S., so from December, January, February, only getting about 6 to 7 hours of sunlight a day. So you get reduced levels of serotonin. Your serotonin is also on a daily cycle. So when you wake up in the morning, the light tends to stimulate serotonin production. So a lot of us feel pretty good in the morning. But towards the end of the day, our serotonin levels begin to drop off with the loss of sunlight. And then we get more relaxed, you feel more tired, and you get prepared for bed. So you have this 24-hour kind of cycle of serotonin. And by the way, this is why for some kids who get online gaming and they're up till 4 a.m. night after night, you can screw up your serotonin levels by disrupting your sleep cycle with this kind of thing. You don't get enough sunlight exposure, and then you end up getting depressed. Now look at what the characteristics are of low serotonin, and you can see from your slide there how this is going to interfere with performance and how it relates to anxiety and irritability and problems with concentration. So what can you do? How can you boost your serotonin? Well, there are a few things you can do very simply. And I often will have just introductory conversations with kids and then ask them if they want to try an experiment. First of all, exercise will boost your serotonin. So what happens during exercise is that your brain sends a message to all your amino acids in your body to go to the muscles, because during hard exercise, you're breaking down your muscles and you're exerting your muscles, and so they need the amino acids to rebuild, except for tryptophan. Tryptophan is the only amino acid that doesn't get sent to the muscles. So it gets a head start through what's called the blood-brain barrier. And there it's converted immediately to 5-hydroxytryptophan and then to serotonin. So this is why immediately following exercise, you feel more elevated for maybe an hour or two. You might get, depending on how hard you exercise, you get a boost. It's one of the reasons why, as a morning person, I try to exercise in the late afternoon when I get home. It's kind of hard to motivate myself, but I don't want to drag through my evening. I want to have a couple more hours. So if I exercise when I get home, I get this serotonin boost, and it also will help you sleep better. Now, another thing that's very simple to do, and it's really fun to experiment with, is to kind of titrate your protein intake throughout the day. What do most kids have for breakfast? What do they have for breakfast?
Carbohydrates, cereal.
Cereal, toast, what else?
We've got a few
Are they eating
protein.
Dairy.
Dairy, some kids are getting dairy. Do they get much dairy in the morning? Pretty good.
Cereal.
Oh yeah.
Some kids do. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of kids around the world eat carbs, mostly carbs for breakfast. And a lot of you, I won't put you on the spot, but a lot of you maybe get mostly carbs for breakfast. Or maybe they don't eat anything at all. Some of your high-performing kids, particularly, the older kids, they may skip breakfast completely. So then, what do they like at 10:30? 10:30? Yeah. Are they kind of like this? Those of you who, you see them about 10 or 10:30, they're kind of starting to drag. Maybe you're starting to drag by 10 or 10:30. So what do? What do they do? Do they get a tea break or a recess? Time to eat anything? Yeah? And what do they eat?
Sugar.
Yeah, more sugar. A lot of us reach for a cup of coffee, or the kids reach for a sugary drink or biscuits or carbs. So let's review what happens to your body when you're taking in simple carbs. What does it do to your blood sugar level?
Boost it.
Right, you get a real boost in your blood sugar level, don't you, when you eat simple carbs like that. And then what does your brain do? Some of you know this. Some of you got a little more science background than others. What does your brain do in response to that elevated blood sugar level? Yes, I heard it. I heard it. Insulin. Yes, your brain releases insulin to convert the sugar into fat, okay, to put it into storage. So once you eat simple carbs in the morning, or anytime you eat them, you get an immediate boost in blood sugar, and then you get an immediate boost in insulin. And how do you feel?
Great.
You feel great, exactly. You feel great for about maybe 2 hours. You feel really good. You feel alert. You feel energized for about 2 hours. And then what happens?
Slump.
Yes, you slide. So a lot of kids, maybe most, and maybe quite a few of you, you do this. In the morning you're up, you feel really good, and then you kind of hit this curve, and then you're coming down. And so what do? You reach for a simple
Sugar.
carb, sugar, and you go, and then start coming down again. And then you have lunch, right? And what do the kids have for lunch?
Carbohydrates.
Carbs.
Sometimes they're loaded up. It depends, Yeah, some kids make good choices. Other kids don't make. So they have more carbs. So a lot of kids are doing this. A lot of adults are doing that, right? A lot of you there are kind of doing this all day long. For high performance, for consistently good performance, you want to do this. Okay? You want to keep your serotonin levels in that zone, and you want to keep your blood sugar in the zone. Because you don't want to be losing. See, what a lot of us do is we're leaking energy all day long. We don't really manage our energy very well. And I'm not suggesting that we get really, rigorous about this or very scientific necessarily with kids. And obviously that most kids don't need that level of intervention or support. But a few kids might want to, if they're really competing at something, they might want to. But just for simple concentration, there are really little, just for yourself, would you like to try an experiment?
Yep.
I entice a few of you to try and experiment. The next 4 to 5 days, try getting some protein at breakfast, if you don't already. Now, some of you may already, I got an experiment for you too. But if you do not have a habit of eating protein at breakfast, just take some protein. I want you to get about 15 ounces. That's about the size of the palm of your hand. Have an egg. 2 eggs would be perfect, but have at least 1 egg. Or have a piece of meat, or have a cup of beans will give you enough protein. Peanut butter is very high in protein. If you like, if you have toast, lather the peanut butter on there. But you got to eat quite a bit of peanut butter to get enough grams or ounces of protein. So the daily recommended allowance for adults of protein is 60 ounces, which I can't remember how many. No, 60 grams. Is that right? Is a gram about an ounce? I think it is. But anyway, about the size of your hand, 3 portions the size of the palm of your hand. What a lot of us do is we tend to get most of that protein at dinner, or maybe lunch and dinner. And what I'm suggesting, and not just me, of course, I didn't come up with this all by myself, there's a lot of data out there, but is you spread it out. You spread your protein throughout the day because protein is metabolized much more slowly than sugar is. So protein keeps your blood sugar more constant. Those of you who are struggling to maintain your weight, if you kept this up, I can pretty much promise you that you would discover that you're not craving, so you're going to eat less actually over time, because you're not going to be doing this up and down business, and you're not going to get so hungry at noontime or around meal times. You're going to be more consistent. If you want, I can send you a list. I have a list of protein content, how to get enough protein, a variety of foods and their protein content. I have a list I can send that to you if you want to do that. But it's kind of fun to do the experiments with kids. You can do it as a science experiment. You can do it just as part of your homeroom kind of activity, or you can do it individually with some kids. You can do it through the counseling program. But just having kids look at what happens with energy exchange and how balancing out your protein intake throughout the day will keep your serotonin levels at an optimal level generally. Now, where some kids have difficulty, if you're already getting protein in the morning, what I would suggest to you is you do an experiment the next 4 or 5 days and get a little bit of a protein snack in the afternoon. A lot of us in the afternoon, I'm guilty of this too sometimes, will just reach for something that's a simple carb at 3 or 4 o'clock. And either in addition to, it's okay to have a simple carb, but add a protein to it. A cheese stick, little thing of yogurt. You know what? Yeah, I know you have to watch your sugar, but see if you can get some protein in with that snack in the afternoon and see what that does to your energy level. Now, with some school districts in the U.S., I've been talking about this for a few years in the U.S., and there was interesting, a school district in Texas, a superintendent heard me, and he got really intrigued with this, and he was in a district that had a very high proportion of lower SES kids. And he said, you know, it kind of makes sense to me that on those high-stakes test days that we would provide breakfast for all the kids. And I said, that's a great idea. Because then he would be guaranteed that the kids would get protein at breakfast time. And that's what they started to do. On those high-stakes test days, they provided breakfast for kids. And then some districts did it on the AP advanced placement, you know, those college, any kind of college credit kinds of, any kind of high-stakes test. They started to coach the kids in what to have for breakfast to sustain their concentration throughout the morning, because some of those high-stakes exams are 3 or 4 hours. And you're going to lose your energy if you don't pay attention. We've got, what, just about 20 minutes left?
That's right.
Okay. Okay, so that's our experiment. All right, let's talk about any comments or questions anybody wants to make about the mood management energy exchange thing? Okay.
It'd be good, good to get the protein list.
Yeah.
And just so you know, that, everyone's been given that article about systematic risk-taking that you mentioned.
Oh, okay.
So they've got that on their shared drive, and they've also got your article on permanence, you know, the 3 Ps.
Explanatory style.
Yeah, the explanatory style article. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. All right. One thing I didn't mention, I forgot to mention, another way to keep your serotonin levels good, sugar and caffeine intake. Reduce your sugar and caffeine intake. I don't know, in your context, are a lot of kids, do you have primary kids drinking a lot of caffeine? Is that popular in Australia? Or not so much? Not so much. Maybe. It might be more of an issue for the secondary kids than for primary kids. Okay. Let's go on to the last.
And a big issue for the teachers, I might add.
Yeah, well, okay.